Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. So today is a theme which I thought of a long time ago. It's taken me a long time to get to the video, but I thought I would finally do it. And just going to be showing some records that start with sound effects. This is something which has always appealed to me. And it's interesting, when I was compiling my list of records to show, I was amazed at how many of the first records I ever heard when I was growing up actually started with sound effects. And that might have something to do with why I like it so much. There's a wonderful quote from someone, and I don't know who it is, but somebody who didn't like the idea of records starting with sound effects. And they basically said, if you get an album that starts with sound effects, you might as well treat it as if it's got an aural defect on it and take it back to the shop. I think the point that this person was making was that what's the point of messing about with sound effects? Just cut to the chase, get straight into the music. But I've always liked the idea of starting a record with some kind of atmospheric soundscape, something going on into which the music then intrudes. Anyway, I'm going to show you a few examples of this and be pleased to know if anybody can think of any others. I can think of a few more. I'm just going to show 10. So the first one, the first rock record I ever heard when I was a kid was 10cc, the original soundtrack. And this record starts with the Godley and Cream suite, Une Nuit à Paris, One Night in Paris, which is this great big operatic conceit. But the album starts with the sound of a Parisian street. So you hear the street vendors, you hear cars hooting in the street. Wonderful touch. You hear a Caribbean band playing, and then there's a creaking door. A door opens, and then the song starts with the words "Bonjour, Monsieur." So the idea is that the door is opened. I think it's meant to be the door of a hotel, and that's how the album starts. So it's very, very atmospheric, works brilliantly, sets the scene very well for that song, and that's my first one, 10cc. Now, most things go back to the Beatles, really, and I guess, with George Martin helping them along, they often had recourse to using tapes, that kind of thing, particularly when they got to the Sergeant Pepper era. Obviously, George Martin started using tapes. The start of the Sergeant Pepper album, of course, opens with the sound of a kind of crowd, isn't it? And an orchestra warming up. But I'll go with the album before because this is the first one that I heard as a child. I love this example. This is an example of what you might call audio verite, where it's not strictly speaking sound effects. Nobody's used a tape or anything like that, but it is just the sound of studio chatter, essentially. And you hear somebody coughing in the background, and then you hear George counting in the song. That was the first bit of Beatles music, so called, I ever heard when I was a kid, and such a fantastic way to open up that record. So there we go, Revolver. And then another album I heard when I was very young, and that is clearly related to the Beatles, is Pink Floyd, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And this has a very atmospheric start. The opening song, Astronomie Dominée, which is a Syd Barrett song all about interstellar travel. It's one of the most spacey Floyd songs in the canon, really. And of course, it fades in with a wonderful sound effect of it's meant to be, I think it's meant to be a guy on an intercom at NASA or something like that, and he's basically reading out the sounds, or he's reading out the names of various constellations, and you hear a bit of Morse code coming through, and it's clearly meant to set the scene for some kind of interstellar travel type theme. Opens the album brilliantly, and of course Pink Floyd went on to many more examples in their career. They often started records with sound effects, and there's one really big famous example which I'm not going to talk about, but I'm going to mention another Floyd record as we get further into the video. Now, another record I heard quite early on, 1979, 1980, was the Buggles and the Age of Plastic. And this record starts out, the first song on this record is called Living in the Plastic Age, and it has a wonderful, evocative opening couple of minutes where it's a kind of nightmarish soundscape. You hear various things going on. You hear somebody shouting. You hear sampled phones ringing. It's quite a stressful, quite a claustrophobic kind of opening. Got a feeling you hear some other sounds as well, maybe running feet. There's a kind of atmosphere of peril in the opening moments of this record. And eventually this kind of synth drone comes in underneath these strange disembodied shouts. And strident telephone rings, and then the song starts proper. But a really, really atmospheric way to start the record, and a touch of Floyd, I think, in the way that the Buggles used atmospherics, for sure. One of the first Queen albums I ever got when I was a kid was Sheer Heart Attack, and this record actually does have some proper sound effects at the start of it. They're used at the beginning of the album for the song Brighton Rock, which is basically, it's a song about two young lovers meeting in Brighton by the seaside and having a bit of a dalliance amongst the penny arcades. And for this, Roy Thomas Baker and the band decided to launch the album with some sound effects. I think it was a BBC tape of a fairground. So you basically, as soon as the needle drops onto the record, you hear these bustling crowds at the seaside, and you hear a kind of fairground ride. And it's a very kind of sunny, optimistic sounding scene. And then Brian May's guitar riffing comes in really kind of tight and coiled, and then they just launch into the song proper. It's a fantastic way to start the record, sets the scene for that song. It's almost like a little short film, really. And don't think Queen ever did that again. I could be mistaken. I can't think of another record by them which starts with sound effects, but that one was very effective. Okay, two by Paul McCartney now, and this one sprung to mind. Back to the Egg from 1979 begins with the sound of a radio tuner, somebody changing channels on a radio. That's the first track, Reception, which is quite a different way to start an album, really. McCartney had never done anything like that before, really. I think he was maybe trying to move into edgier territory with this record, but certainly that leads into the opening track, which is an instrumental. So it starts with some sound effects, goes into an instrumental, and then after that it goes into the first proper song, Getting Closer. And the other Paul McCartney one that I thought of, I don't have it on vinyl to show today, is Tug of War, the album Tug of War, which actually starts with the sound of a tug of war, believe it or not. It fades in very slowly. It sounds like it's been recorded maybe in a gymnasium. You hear all these, you hear somebody shouting, exhorting the people to pull and push, and it sounds like they're all kind of straining at the rope, quite literally. And after that's been happening for maybe for a minute or so, McCartney's majestic vocal comes in, singing the opening to the song Tug of War, and that's a highly effective way to start that particular record. Now, this one is the mother and daddy of them all, really, and this one was one of the first ones that sprung to mind as soon as I thought of this theme. Kiss, Destroyer, obviously starts with their immortal track, Detroit Rock City. Now, this album was produced by Bob Ezrin, and he was one of these high concept producers, a bit like George Martin. There was no way he was going to allow Kiss just to start the album with a count in. So what they came up with for this one was an entire scene, really. It starts in somebody's kitchen. Again, there's a radio tuning in and out. You hear somebody doing the washing up. Then you hear them jingling their keys as they get ready to leave the house. On the radio, you hear a news report of a fatal traffic accident which has just happened, which is a great touch because, of course, the song Detroit Rock City essentially is about a guy in his truck crashing and dying on the freeway. So you get a little sneak preview of that on the radio. Gets his keys, jangles his keys, goes outside. You hear him getting into his van, turning the ignition. Then the radio in the van or in the truck comes on, and you hear some snatches of early Kiss music. You hear a bit of Rock and Roll All Night playing. The engine starts, he drives away, and then the guitars come in for Detroit Rock City. What a fantastic start to a record. Just like a film, really, you know, thinking in terms of narrative and story, and just a great way to start that album. So Kiss, Destroyer. Back to Floyd again. Couldn't resist this one because this is one I've always really, really liked. And I know this album doesn't get a great press, but this is their comeback album from 1987, I think, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, the first one without Roger Waters. This record starts with the song, it's not really a song, it's an instrumental called Signs of Life, which is a very floaty track. It's always evoked images of space travel, again, for me, or maybe kind of UFOs appearing in the sky. It's definitely quite spacey, but it starts out in the water. what they did, they went out onto the river. David Gilmour recorded this record on his houseboat on the River Thames, and I think they just, went out on the boat one day, and there's the sound of somebody paddling in water, and it fades in very gradually. You might be able to hear bird song as well. I'm not entirely sure, but certainly it's a very watery start to the record, and then gradually Rick Wright's floating synth start to wash into the picture, and then the track gradually builds from there. But yeah, Floyd, always used sound effects. I'm thinking of Medal, Howling Wind at the start of Medal, but there are other examples too. I'll leave you to work out what they are. And we'll finish with this one, which is an absolute classic, one of my all-time favorite album openers. This is the first Black Sabbath record, which starts out with the sound of rain and the sound of thunder rolling threateningly on the horizon, and a church bell tolling. And it's like the start of a classic Hammer horror film, fits perfectly with the music. And it's just a really atmospheric way to start the record, sets the scene perfectly. When the music finally starts, you really feel like you've been placed into that environment. And I guess that's what sound effects are for, really. They're to kind of place you in whatever it is, whatever place it is that the band want you to be in before their music starts. So I love that example, Black Sabbath, and the opening to their debut record. So there's going to be lots of other examples of this. I've deliberately left out quite a few, so be interested to know if anybody can think of any more. So that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.